Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Working so hard like a soldier, can't afford a thing on TV. Deep in my heart I abhor ya. Can't get food for the kid. Good God, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! We gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Who is to blame in what country? Never can get to the one. Dealing in multiplication, and they still can't feed everyone. Oh no, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh no, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Out in the street, out in the street, out in the playground, in the dark side of town. Oh, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Hey, we gonna rock down to Electric Avenue. Oh yeah, rock it in the daytime, Electric Avenue. Rock it in the night, take it higher, Electric Avenue. Rock it in Miami, Miami, Electric Avenue. Oh, in a big town, higher, Electric Avenue. We gonna rock down to Electric Avenue.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to our insight session, which is called, Is the Energy Crisis Going to Hamper Employment in the Financial Services Sector? Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christina Jenkins, and I'm going to be doing the introductions for the session today. At GIFS, we are privileged to deal with the lion's share of the market leaders operating in the South African financial services sector. One of the most common observations by human capital practitioners is that it's difficult to find candidates to match the caliber expected by organizations. There are various reasons, ladies and gentlemen. Key among them is that candidates aren't displaying knowledge that shows that they're top of the trends and expertise in their areas of work. This morning, we're privileged to have experts to unpack this key topic of, is the energy crisis going to hamper employment in the financial services sector? Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me such great pleasure to introduce to you all the IIG Counsel, Linroy Peters. Ladies and gentlemen, Linroy is currently serving the Insurance Institute of Gauteng, IIG, for the second consecutive year, and co-opted council member on the education portfolio driven by a passion to give back to the industry. Having started his industry some 20 years ago in personal lines, he has furthered his formal education and developed his skills as a commercial property underwriter, a role that he thrives in. He serves on the IIG Council as a hard-working, disciplined, and committed team member. He sees himself as a true product of the caliber of individuals that the insurance industry can produce when education meets opportunity and a willingness to grow. He strives to be an exemplary father to two amazing teenagers, and also a husband and a student who is just trying to complete his formal education, an ambitious career man, and an aspiring golfer who just wants to break 100. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, please may I ask for the incredible Linroy Peters to come through to say a few words. Thank you very much, Linroy. Over to you.
Wow, Christina, what an introduction. Thank you so much for that. Good morning, everybody, from a very cold Johannesburg. I would like to thank you for joining us this morning as we hear insights from our speakers on this topic: is the energy crisis going to hamper employment in the financial sector? Now, kindly be reminded that attendance on today's webinar awards you with 1 CPD point, and that certificates will be available in a week's time. You can also access these certificates along with the recording of today's session on the IIG's website. Now, on behalf of the IIG President, Simpiwe, and all the council members, we would like to thank you, our sponsors for today's session, the Graduate Institute of Financial Sciences, more affectionately known in the market as GIFS. Your continued partnership with the IIG is greatly appreciated. And I think without further ado, Christina, I'm going to hand back to you so we could actually get the whoop cracking on this amazing and such a relevant topic. Over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for that, Linroy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it does give me such great pleasure of introducing you to your moderator for the day, ladies and gentlemen, and that is none other than Dr. Kirshen Pillay, the CEO of the Graduate Institute of Financial Sciences, multi-award winning. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kirshen Pillay for the Graduate Institute of Financial Sciences has been lauded internationally for his efforts towards bringing about social and economic change to the African continent through the transformative power of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Pillay and the GIFS team for their recent accolade of Employer of the Year at the African Business Awards 2023. With that being said, Dr. Kirshen, I'd like to hand over to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Christina. In the first 6 months of 2023, South Africa experienced 173 days of load shedding. This means, as South Africans, we only had 1 day. Business Tech News Report also revealed that up to the end of June this year, there has been nearly permanent load shedding since September last year. The impact of our energy crisis has far-reaching consequences, some of which we often are unaware of. For example, or gastrointestinal issues due to you and I unknowingly eating rotten food because our cold chains have been compromised. Recent headlines have shown KZN farmers cry over 12,000 liters of spoiled milk due to power issues. Load shedding is killing the cold chain in South Africa, and it's pushing up food prices. How safe is the food in your fridge after load shedding? Good morning, insighters. It is evident that the energy crisis is impacting us on various levels, and it is physically making us sick. But today, the question I want to pose to you as the financial services sector is your job at risk? Is the energy crisis going to hamper employment within the financial services sector? Colleagues, the energy crisis in South Africa has been a significant concern, and it is essential to understand how it may affect employment within our sector. To shed more light on this topic, we are honored and privileged to have a very familiar face joining us today. He is a well-known political analyst. Professor Bheki Mngomezulu is the quick-witted professor and is the bane of every corrupt politician in South Africa. and we watch with bated breath as he makes them squirm on national television. Prof. Beki is the former professor of political science at the University of Western Cape, where he also was the deputy dean for research in the economic and management sciences faculty. Prof. Beki is now the director of CANRAD, which is the Center of Advancement for Non-Racialism and Democracy at the Nelson Mandela University in Quebec. Ladies, Prof. Beki is not just good looking, he also holds 7 academic degrees and has published 6 books. Welcome back, Prof. It is so good to have you on the IIG Insights platform again.
Thank you very much for that humbling introduction, Doc, and good morning to all the participants and to Christina in particular. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Our next panelist is a celebrity, equally a celebrity in his own right. He has been an enabler for job creation, promoting South Africa as an international destination of choice for global business services. Fellow insiders, help me welcome the former CEO of BPESA, which is Business Process Enabling South Africa, and now the owner and director of Paladin Consulting, Mr. Andy Searle, who will be shedding some light, pun intended, on the matter at hand. Welcome, Andy. Great to have you on the IIG panel.
Christian, thank you very much. And to Prof. Beki and to all the IIG guests, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Andy. Our IIG insiders, you are always engaging. So I encourage and share your thoughts and comments in the chat box, and we will definitely get to them. So without any further ado, I would like us to dive straight in, and I want to start with you, Andy. Andy, you have long been an ambassador for South Africa, and in your previous role as the CEO of BPESA, and in your current role as the CEO and director of Paladin Consulting, you have a mandate to market the country, to create youth employment, facilitate a skills ecosystem, and attract both local and foreign investment into the country. How has the energy crisis impacted the work of such organizations, particularly from a job creation perspective?
Christian, I think to answer that question, let me start by just giving a quick overview for the audience of the global business services sector. So this is a sector that's enjoying double-digit growth globally. Last year, the market for the outsourcing portion of it was valued at just over $260 billion, and it's projected to continue growing in double-digit figures through to 2023. The global business services market is broader than the outsourcing component. It includes the shared service centers, much of that will be familiar to many of the guests on the call today. So your internal call centers, processing centers, etc., that serve your local market, but also those that service group offices around the world. Now, that global business services market is also growing at double-digit figures. In South Africa, the domestic portion of this business services environment, particularly the portion that uses contact centers as a channel, employs approximately 210,000 people. And the largest employer of those people is, in fact, financial services, employing more than 54% of them. Less than 30% of that number are managed through third-party service providers. Now, the domestic portion of that segment in South Africa is not growing. It tracks GDP growth very closely. And that's because those components are directly linked to the value chains of the local business and driven by the factors in the domestic market. But on the other hand, the export segment, which employs just over 70,000 people at the moment, is growing very quickly. And in fact, it's been enjoying an annual compounded growth rate of 23% since 2018 as an average. And it's added more than 85,000 jobs since January 2018. Some have been retained, some have moved into other sectors of the economy, and there has been, some form of attrition. Now, to take that into account and then think about the impact of the energy crisis, this sector is, generally speaking, a lot less energy intensive compared to some of the other heavier industries and sectors of the economy. So it does make it slightly more resilient to the power fluctuations that we have. But if we look at the data and we go back to 2016 to date, we lost 518 days to load shedding. In the same period where we've added over 85,000 jobs. And the correlation between those two data sets is only 0.66. So it's not suggesting to date that the energy crisis is slowing down our ability to create new jobs in the export segments of global business services. That's the good news to date. The other good news is that those jobs are primarily for young people, 80% of them. 63% of them are for women, and over 96% of those jobs are for Black people. And so the sector is creating employment opportunities for the right target population in our country. Where does it all come from? It's the services are being procured by companies in the North American markets, in the UK, in Europe, the rest of Africa, Australia. And South Africa has performed well. South Africa has been the top global outsourcing destination for the English-speaking procurement markets for 2 years, and it's been in second place for 3 years over the past 5 years. And we've got a good brand, and it's growing in its brand value. The sector master plan sets out an ambitious yet hopeful target of adding, in the mid-case scenario, just over 230 additional jobs between now and 2030 to the economy. But in the high case, that could be as much as 400,000 jobs. So in reflecting on the impact of the energy crisis in that particular export segment of global business services, to date, it has not affected us that drastically. But moving forward, the greatest obstacle to hyperscaling that sector and achieving those growth numbers is by being able to expand this to tier 2 and tier 3 towns, and in particular to reach young people who can learn and work from their communities, or at least much closer to home. And therein lies the problem. The load shedding has a much more direct impact. It's disruptive, it's costly to work around for both companies and individuals. And if we aren't able to address that, we're going to reach a glass ceiling, and that opportunity of growth and job creation in that export segment is going to be completely underutilized.
Andy, thank you very much for that. The stats are riveting. From what you're saying, South Africa is ranked very well in terms of being a preferred global business process outsourcing destination. And those are your good news stories that are at play despite our energy woes. You mentioning to me here that the financial services sector makes up 54% of the 210,000 people that are employed by the sector on a local front. On an international front, we are seeing that there is compounded growth sitting at 28%, and the possibility of 85,000 jobs that are going to be created. These stats are very promising. More so, the employment opportunities are coming at the right target areas, which is very, very exciting, and it's also very reassuring. What I would like to know is, you mentioned that, we're saying that there's 200,000 jobs that are possibly going to be created by the international market, and possibly even 400,000 mark, more jobs to be created. And we know that South Africa, and Africa rather, has a large youth population that is possibly going to be serving to cater to the needs of the entire globe in time to come. But our energy crisis is putting that ceiling on that growth, from what you're saying in terms of accessing the people at the ground level. But I want to just take a step back and deviate slightly. What do you believe are South Africa's key selling points at this juncture, where we're still maintaining that top tier business coming into South Africa from UK, from North America, from Australia? What's those selling points that, regardless of the crisis, we're still doing well?
Yeah, I think that's so relevant in trying to just figure out, why is it that we are succeeding in this particular area. I just want to add before answering that, for the benefit of the audience, is that currently 27% of that export market growth is made up of financial services, of which 18% of that is for insurance, the balance for banking and other financial services. So what are those key selling points then? Well, there are a few things. First of all, we've got a track record of world-class delivery, and that's underpinned by a few key points. The first is that we've got an abundance of young people with proven potential. We've seen it in being first place and second place in 5 years consecutively. They can perform in entry-level jobs with excellence. Why? Because they have great understanding of what they're dealing with. They can connect emotionally. They take ownership of the services that they're fulfilling, and they strive for quality of service outcome. So that's the first point, and that's benchmarked against other countries. So we should take pride in the fact that South Africans can consistently perform at the top level of service delivery compared to other countries. The second is our supply chain. Well, we do have good quality graduates in certain faculties coming through our university and our college or post-school education training system. And as much as we think that the system is not functioning and there are many areas for improvement, we need to understand that there are also many, there are a lot of great people coming through there with tremendous capabilities that are being snapped up into some of the higher level professional roles. The third is that we've got a capacity for innovation and solutioning in the country. We are known to be problem solvers, and that's important in today's times. The fourth is that we've demonstrated our operational resilience, and particularly during the really tough years of COVID, where South Africa, certainly in this particular environment, where these services were regarded as essential services, we continued to deliver 24/7, both in the local market and supporting the global market. Other countries failed to do that. And in that process, South Africa surfaced to the top of the radar for many countries who'd not really looked our way before, in particular, the North American countries. We've also got what's regarded as a secure investment environment, despite what a lot of people would think, compared to many of the other delivery destinations. And lastly, and importantly, the quality of our service is matched with between a 40 and 60% cost savings for companies who would otherwise be delivering those services in their own countries. And that's substantial when globally we're facing such high cost pressures. So South Africa has a really good quality proposition in those export services, from entry level to much higher end services, and we should exploit that.
Andy, thank you very much for that. And I think the common theme coming through is resilience. There's something so special about the South African makeup of its people that its resilience always shines through. And I want to quickly bring in Prof. Becky. Prof, I'd like to loop you into this. From your perspective, as an academic and as a political analyst, is there a positive story to tell, considering we just seem to be getting on with it, despite our energy challenge, and we're growing in leaps and bounds? And secondly, Prof, I also want you to think, what do you think about the needs, or what needs to happen to pull us out of this energy crisis so we can stimulate the economy more and create those jobs that are needed and achieve the 400,000 mark that Andy's talking about, as opposed to the 200,000 mark? Prof, over to you.
Thank you very much, Keshen, for your two-pronged question. And in fact, Andy has made my job easier by laying the foundation, because some of the points that he has highlighted will also feature in my response. As a point of departure, I must say that apartheid was a terrible system, but it was a well-oiled machine, and it achieved the goals for those who had in fact created it, starting with D.F. Malan in 1948. So it was a well-oiled machine. So on the negative side, of course, it had serious implications for everyone, regardless of the racial categorization. But then on the positive side, it trained all of us to be resilient. So the resilience that, in fact, Andy is talking about comes in part from that experience, because we learned to survive under very controversial circumstances and very pressing situations. So that is one thing. So basically, my first response then to the first part of your question is that as South Africans, we are a resilient nation. That is number one. But then secondly, we are patient. Despite everything that has been happening, despite the fact that our appliances have been destroyed by load shedding and a couple of other negative things, but we have been patient. There's been no civil war. We are just hoping that things will change for the better tomorrow or next week or next month, and it goes on and on. We are a patient nation. But then the other point is that we are tolerant. As much as we may disagree with one another on one point or the other, but then we are tolerant of one another, which is in fact one positive thing, because then we are able to manage the situation hard as it is, but we are still getting along without any
I'm not sure whether it's an issue on my side or Prof. Beki's side, but we'll come back to Prof. Beki. We'll go back to Prof. Beki, and what I would like to then do, Andy, is just bring you back in, and just to pick up on what you were saying earlier and what Prof. Beki was intimating. The financial services sector is the one sector that's showing some sort of employment resilience. And, you know, we're always talking about this doom and gloom picture. We're talking about how bad South Africa is. But when we're looking at the statistics and when we're looking at our international partners and how they are bringing business into the country, I think this message is not getting out there enough about how good South Africa is doing, regardless of the issues and the challenges at hand. But I do want to go back and talk about the negative a little and say, okay, here is South Africa. We're doing really well. What's the forecast for the sector if there's no long-term solution to our energy requirements? So what I'm trying to know is, yes, we're growing at the state because we're resilient, we have the capacity, etc. But what happens if there's no long-term solution in place? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I see Prop is back, so maybe what I'll say now will also create some touch points for the Prop's comments in a moment. I think just three perspectives. On the one hand, if we look at the combination of some high growth in selected sectors like the export market for GBS, if we look at some of the economic indicators and trading indicators at the moment, like capacity utilization, car registrations, household debt to GDP, reduced bankruptcies, etc., the data suggests improvement, but that's because we're looking at, you know, movement from a very low base back in the COVID days and the terrible disruption that we've experienced and economically. And as we know, we're at about a 0.4% GDP at the moment. But so we're looking at indicators of some incremental improvement, and that starts to suggest that there can be some opening up in financial services. So lenders might become, you know, a bit more optimistic in the short term, may make credit conditions more accessible, where people are wanting to now invest in home improvements, in small business investments, etc. So there could be some stimulus there in the short term. On the insurance side, people have now learned from the impact of the past, maybe wanting to secure their assets, secure their wealth, their health, and there could be a stimulus of spend to some extent within that very low incremental improvements. And banks may start to, push certain products, find that there is a propensity to save a little bit more for that next unexpected event like COVID. These things could happen, but arguably they're likely to be short term with the current status quo. Because if we balance that then with what our National Treasury have said themselves in their most recent budget review, it's not good. We have a look at that outlook, which is growth, and I would argue it's at a very wishful level of 1.4% through to 2025. We're only at 0.4% at the moment. And they cite the electricity supply issue has been the most significant factor that's stunting that growth and constraining growth in investment, production, and employment. And we know that financial services providers, like many others, are under extreme cost pressure at the moment. They run intensive data centers, they have technology systems, they're having to invest to mitigate the disruption and the unreliability of the power supplies we have at the moment. Plus, on top of that, we've got weakening demand, and we've got lower and lower disposable income at a consumer level and declining profits at a business level. So when we look at that, we can start to see that the casualty in all of this through cost cutting to maintain profits at a business level is likely to be jobs and in that scenario. So I would argue that we need a dual approach. We can't live with the problem. We need to, and so far as our stunted domestic growth goes, with the challenges we face, innovate solutions to deal with that, to maximize the growth that we can achieve out of that. But simultaneously, we need to go after the new growth areas. If we think of investment in renewable energies as an example, if we think of the opportunity of globally traded services as an example, there are other areas that offer revenue and job growth potential that's significant to us as an economy. And I would argue that we have to tackle both, but we should really see a shift in our resources and our efforts into those sectors of the economy that can create the highest levels of growth and job creation the fastest and at the greatest scale, while innovating through the challenges and solving them in the domestic market.
Andy, thank you very much for that. And Prof. Becky, I think if nothing else, your interlude from yours proves to us that load shedding is something that still impacts us on a day-to-day basis, and it has shown its teeth to us with you exiting. But back to you, Prof. How can we stimulate the economy and job creation, in your opinion?
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry about this glitch. This is the new normal. That's the term we borrowed from the COVID-19 pandemic. It has become our new normal. So let me address the second part of your two-pronged question, which is basically trying to get us out of this chaos that we find ourselves in. There are a couple of things that we need to do. The first one is honesty. There's been a lack of honesty in the main in a number of fronts. One, from the government side, and then secondly, from Eskom's management. There was a bizarre reason where once given as to why there was load shedding. They told us that coal is wet. I said, no, this is an insult to the nation, because even a kid from grade R would know that that can't be the reason. If you say coal is wet, the question is, didn't you know that at some point it's going to rain? And when it rains, coal will be wet. I mean, it's common logic. And then for those of us who grew up in rural areas, if you already have a fire burning, you can go and cut wet wood out there, put it there it will catch up fire. So then why can't we do the same with this coal? So that was the most bizarre reason. So in other words, the point I'm making is there is no honesty in telling us exactly why we have the energy crisis. There are a number of other reasons. We've been told about sabotage. We've been told about engine failures. We've been told about maintenance, scheduled maintenance as the reasons why we have this problem. So honesty becomes a problem. And then secondly, we need a government that will listen. I'm not sure if our president has been listening. I'm one of the people who was vocal when the president was intimating that he was going to appoint a minister of electricity. And the question I asked is, what is that person going to do? You already have a minister of state-owned enterprises in Pravin Gordhan. You already have the Minister of Energy in Gwede Mantashe, and then now we are appointing a Minister of Electricity. What is he going to do? Those are some of the questions I was asking. And then, of course, when the person was eventually appointed, it was someone with civil engineering that made things even worse. So I think that there is something we can do in that front if we listen to what the cries are, and then, of course, act on that. The next point has to do with drawing lessons from success stories from within the continent and then also from outside. Let's look at how other countries have dealt with the energy crisis and then learn or draw lessons from that. Then the fourth, or which is the penultimate one, is to adopt meritocracy when we appoint people into positions. We cannot appoint someone just because we happen to like that person and then leave up someone with the requisite skills and knowledge just because we hate that person. And I think at the center of all of this is factional politics, more especially within the governing party, whereby if you belong to the wrong faction, it doesn't really matter how capable you are not going to get the nod. And it doesn't matter how terrible you are, if you are in the quote-unquote right faction, you will still be given a green light. So if we can focus on meritocracy, I think we can follow the example of Singapore, which moved from being a third world country to being a first world country simply because they were implementing meritocracy. And then the last one, of course, is to desist from embracing patronage, whereby we respect individuals as if they were gods. Even if they are not performing, we still keep them in positions at the expense of the nation. And I think those are but some of the things that we can do in the immediate to try and get us out of this quagmire. Thank you.
Prof. Becky, I always love your honesty. And I think what you've said is so relevant and felt by all. In order for us to stimulate our economy, in order for us to create jobs, we need to have honesty and transparency at all levels. I think that's such an important message to drive home. In addition to that, I think you're talking about we need to have, there's this talk about this public-private partnerships that we all need to be a part of something. We all need to collaborate. We all need to do. But we need to have parties on the other end that listen, and we need that government to listen. And most believe that the financial services sector is poised to take over, but it all starts with these key simple foundations such as meritocracy, anti-factionalism, honesty, and willing parties. Now, before we go on to the next question, I just want to share with you a quick and this will be available for you guys to look at later on, but just for those who want to know more about the sector, there are 8 risks that have been highlighted, and those 8 risks are business disruption, increased costs, reduced productivity, delayed investment decisions, impact on data centers, constraints on expansion, government response, which Professor Becky has alluded to, ripple effects on other industries. So those that want more information on it, once the video is released, you may click on the links that are provided and will give you more insight on the risks that will affect the financial services sector in relation to the energy crisis. Now, Prof, while you are on a roll now, you're known within your sphere of influence for providing practical advice. What have you learned from ordinary South Africans and business owners about their challenges regarding the power supply crisis?
Thank you very much for that question. There are quite a number of things that you can point at, but in the interest of time, I'll just highlight a few. One, people are concerned about the size of our government. So the first thing that we need to do is to trim our government, more especially the cabinet, because being a cabinet minister means that there is a lot of money that goes in there. We have to be taken care of if you are in Pretoria. You have to be taken care of if you're in Cape Town. And then, of course, your travels are taken care of by us and a number of other things that go with that. So the first step is then to trim the government and then save some money to address this energy crisis sooner than later. And then number two, we have to remove non-performing ministers. We know that there are ministers who are not delivering on their mandate, but they are kept there for one reason or the other. And if we are to continue doing that, it means that we'll end up having those ministers. And then, of course, the problem that we're talking about is not going to dissipate. And then, of course, we have to subsidize those who are trying hard to meet government halfway. Because the truth is that government cannot solve this problem alone, so then we have to come to the party. So therefore, it means that those who are buying generators, let's subsidize them, because they're basically trying to make sure that we keep on going despite this energy crisis. And those who are trying everything possible to buy diesel, expensive as it is, as it went up last night, then we subsidize those. And those who are able to buy solar panels, subsidize them, because it means that government is meeting its general public halfway. And then the next one is that communities, especially those who are able, they should pay for electricity. Because the reality of the matter is there are people who are able to pay, but for some reason, they decide not to pay. And that, of course, puts Eskom in a very critical situation, which is why then they are not going to get out of this problem. And then, of course, government departments are also to blame for this at all three levels. That is a national, provincial, and the local government level. There are municipalities, they still owe Eskom, and then we expect Eskom to perform miracles. That is not going to happen. And then, of course, the last and the most important one, let us revisit the ministerial handbook. There are so many benefits that go to ministers, to the extent that some of them don't feel what you and I are feeling. And therefore, in the process, they are going to drag their feet in addressing the problem, because in their mind, that problem does not exist. You are feeling it, I am feeling it, a minister somewhere does not feel it. So then, of course, it becomes a problem. So those are some of the things that I can mention for now. Then, of course, we can engage later on, but those are just some of them. Thank you.
Prof, again, that's fantastic. So you're basically saying that we need, going back to your original response, we need honesty, we need to trim our government. We need to create meritocracy. We need to create performance management structures. We need to subsidize those energy products that people are purchasing or services that they are using, and that needs to come from government. But most importantly, you're saying that we need to review the ministerial handbook, because the people at the top making the decisions are not the ordinary South African, and they are not experiencing what we experience on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, they are disengaged from what its people are really facing. Now, I would love to hear from the panel what you guys think about this. I can see Keith saying totally agree, so is Harley, but I would like to know, how do you think that the financial services sector, colleagues on call, can hold government accountable to these points? Because I saw Brendan earlier say, do we need to have more corporate involvement? How do we get more corporate involvement? What do you guys think as the financial services sector we can do? Or do you all have any questions that you all would like to pose to either Andy or Becky to ensure that we are adequately dealing with this energy crisis? Do we engage the services of organizations like BUSA? What is it, do you think, we need to do? Prometheus put up something to say, we need to rally together and demand changes. I agree, and I think 2024 is upon us, and lots needs to be done, and a lot of introspection as a South African, from a South African perspective, needs to take place. And just adding on to this, Prof, before I go on to my next question for you, I find what holds South Africa back is that we're too focused on these individual identities. And if we focus on, as a collective, on a South African identity and do what's best for South Africa first, regardless of whether you're rich or you're poor, and I know we've got one of the biggest Gini coefficients in the world, whether you are Black, white, Indian, whether you are the CEO or just a matriculant or someone still in school, we all need to adopt that South African identity and that passion for our country again in order to solve for crises like this. What are your thoughts on this, Prof?
I agree entirely with that because this is our country. We don't have any other country. Of course, those who are able to, they can relocate to other countries. I've just returned from Australia. I met a number of South Africans who now reside in Australia. And then some of them, of course, are in New Zealand. But not all of us are either able or willing to do that. So what it means, therefore, is that we must save this country with everything we can without destroying any infrastructure, because that is not going to assist us. So the public-private partnership is, in fact, the way to go. But then, of course, both parties must have a listening ear. So the private sector must listen, but also the public sector must listen, and then we must all sing from the same hymn book. For as long as we hold, say, divergent views on how to move forward, then we're going to spend a lot of time arguing, and the problem is going to be sustained. But then if we all pull in the same direction, chances are we stand a better chance to resolve the problem sooner than later. The blame game is not going to help us, but then if we all work together, then we stand a better chance to address the issue sooner than later. That will be my response.
Thank you, Prof. Beki. And Andy, I'd like to loop you into this conversation here. And just from your perspective, just to get some thoughts from you, we have a lot of people, and as Prof. Beki is saying, people are moving to Australia, to New Zealand, etc. But how is it that organizations or countries like Australia are still looking to South Africa to outsource its work? How is it that South Africa is growing so much? Is it something that, do you think that it's time to say, okay, because of this energy crisis or because of X, Y, and Z, we throw down the gauntlet? Or do you believe, Andy, that there's so much more to fight for and that the energy crisis is just one objective as a collective we can fix? And I'm putting a whole mixed bag in here. And lastly, what do you think that the financial services sector can do? The hundreds of people on this call today, what do you believe that they can do practically to help solve and get this energy crisis addressed, in your opinion?
Well, I think the financial services sector plays such a crucial role in the reconstruction and development of our economy, the restructuring of our economy, unlocking access to finances to stimulate business growth. And I think, the financial services sector is also one that's robust, it's tightly governed. It sets a really good standard in terms of the quality and ethics of doing business. We would love, of course, to see rates and fees go down because they put pressure on really tight consumers and businesses. But equitable access to finance is a key to our unlocking the potential for our economic growth in the country for everybody. And the financial services sector plays the leading role in making that possible. But I think also in its leadership role as an industry, as a sector, we've all seen in recent times, again, business leadership in South Africa rallying together with the CEO initiative to partner with government, this time with a slightly different tone in that collaboration. If you've read the press, where the CEO of Bruce has even referred to holding government's feet to the fire when it comes to they must stand up to their part of the deal in working together to solve these challenges. But we've seen how business can lobby, with financial services playing a key role in our response to COVID, as an example, and the vaccination rollout program. So it's not unprecedented. South Africa needs to leverage the leadership talent that it's got. It needs to collaborate with all the social partners, and the leadership in financial services can play a driving role in that process. We need collective action around stimulating demand, around addressing our supply side challenges, rapidly developing skills. The financial services sector across all its dimensions is at the forefront of their digital transformation. We need to move it. We've got to get on with it, and we talked earlier about a whole world that's out there that we risk having pass us by if we aren't ready. Globally traded services are growing. They're not getting smaller. So other sectors of the economy are facing immense pressure for all sorts of reasons. And I think we need to look to the financial services sector to play a leadership role, not just in South Africa, but in unlocking talent potential of Africa, the economic potential. We're part of Africa, unlocking the talent potential of our, our home continent. So yes, I think it's a big role that can be played through access to affordable financial products to stimulate growth of smaller micro enterprises, from a leadership perspective with government to drive policy change, to deal with the obstacles we're facing, like load shedding, in a decisive and effective way, quickly, and setting the tone for enabling growth across the continent of which we form a part, to capitalize on these global opportunities that are growing, not declining. That's what I think this financial services sector needs to do to play a role.
Andy, thank you for this. I just want to go to a comment coming through from Craig. Craig says that South Africa is chosen as an outsourced destination because it's cheap. So you've been integrally involved in outsourced work coming into South Africa. Do you think that the price is the biggest factor as to why outsourced partners choose South Africa as a destination?
No. And there are other countries where you can procure your services a lot cheaper than South Africa, parts of Eastern Europe, certainly the Philippines, India, and we don't compete at the lowest cost. South Africa doesn't even compete in some of those areas, and doesn't intend to. Where we play is to the strengths, and I spoke earlier that in the midst of this digital transformation, automation of processes, there's still a role for a human connectedness where South Africans are unparalleled. And that's not me saying it, that's evidenced by the other source markets and big global buyers of these services when comparing to other delivery destinations. When you think of some of the high-end services that are provided, whether they're medical services, financial advisory services from South Africa, they are top quality. So quality over the past 3 years has played a much more important role as a factor of an investment decision, or an outsourcing decision, should I say. Yes, cost is always important, but what we've found is that organizations are still prepared to pay a premium on price for reliable quality and for innovation and solutioning, which they get from South Africa. So no, it's not all about the lowest cost, and we wouldn't want it to be. We believe in our talent potential and don't want to see that being sweated down. And what we should rather be going for is, with confidence, the higher value work as well. So yeah, I think we are just undercapitalizing on the global opportunity for quality export services. We've got a good runway for entry-level services that we must continue to go for, but these strike me as being lost opportunities. It's on the table. We shouldn't be walking away from it while we've got our heads buried in the problems that we face. We can't take them away from those problems, but we've got to survive. We've got to grow, and we've got to be smart about how we future-proof South Africa for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. And there's a future. but we have to go after it and we have to create it.
No, perfect. Thank you very much for that, Andy. And I think Craig has just commented, alluding to, yeah, he agrees with you. He just feels that, from a cost perspective, we are more who is from a very large BPO sector saying, I agree that quality and innovation comes from South Africa. So it's good to see that regardless or in spite of the energy crisis at hand, there's a lot of good that's being done and there's growth possibilities at play. We need to cap the energy crisis by implementing the points that Prof. Beki mentioned earlier. And from there, we can create a phenomenal African continent. But what I love from what you've said, Andy, is the financial services sector needs to unlock the talent potential, not just in South Africa, but in Africa. We have leaders within the financial services sector who are lauded the world over because of our ethics, our values, our quality, and our talent. So I think those are key for fin services. And as leaders on the on call today, I implore you guys to use your leadership skills to hold the necessary parties accountable. With 5 minutes to go, I want to quickly go to Prof. Beki. Prof, I know you view things from a political lens most often than not. But I want to ask you a question as blunt and as you are known for calling a spade, as you've said it in many a session. Do you think that there's hope for South Africa? And do you think that South Africa is poised to become a global leader in years to come?
Absolutely. I think there is hope for South Africa, but that is not going to happen automatically. Because I'm of the view that we have normalized an abnormal situation. We have corruption that is in the country, but we cannot allow it to stay the way it is. Come 2024, things are going to change. So I remain optimistic that after the 2024 national and provincial government election, the situation in the country will change somewhat, in the sense that if you look at the election trends from 2014, 2016 local government election, 2019, 2021 local government election, you can see that the governing party's support has been going down. For instance, recently it came down from 249 seats to 230, but the DA as well has also been going down. On the other hand, you have the IFP and the EFF and the Freedom Front Plus, whose numbers are going up, are on the upward trajectory. So that tells you that there are things that are changing. With so many political parties, with independent candidates, then things are going to change. And then if we have a coalition government, that is not going to help us in the long run, given that we don't have a clue on how to run a coalition government. But then it's going to help us in the sense that it is going to deal with complacency. Because if you win consistently, you are not likely to be innovative, because you are going to say, it doesn't really matter what I do, I'll win the election anyway. So I'm optimistic that after next year's election, things will change for the better and people will act and will deliver, because they will know that if they don't, then they will lose their position. So that gives me hope that things are going to change for the better.
Fantastic. Becky, thank you very much for that. And the poll just came in. 74% of people on call today are very hopeful for the future of South Africa. To conclude today's discussion on the energy crisis in South Africa, we need to be cognizant of the following. The energy crisis in South Africa indeed poses significant challenges to the financial services sector. While there might be potential negative effects on employment, it is evident that the financial services sector has a special breed of human capital who are forging ahead regardless of the challenges at hand. With this mindset, the financial services sector is set to lead the South African GDP, as well as lead Africa's economic growth and job creation. Therefore, colleagues, it is essential for us to focus on proactive strategies, such as investing in energy infrastructure, diversifying energy sources, embracing flexible work arrangements, and holding those account that need to be held account as a sector in order for us to mitigate these risks. Today, a special thank you to our panelists, Mr. Andy Searle and Professor Beki Ngomizulu. Your insights has been invaluable to the IIG community and the IIG Exco team, and most importantly, our IIG insiders. As always, you have been a fantastic audience. Thank you for being a part of a conversation that matters. Good day, ladies and gentlemen.
Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh, we're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Working so hard like a soldier, can't afford a thing on TV. Deep in my heart I abhor ya, can't get food for the kid. Good God, we're gonna rock Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh, we're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh, we're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Who is to blame in what country? Never can get to the one. Dealing in multiplication, and they still can't feed everyone. Oh no, we're gonna rock Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Oh no, we're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Out in the street, out in the street, out in the playground, in the dark side of town. Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher. Hey, we're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue. Oh yeah, rock it in the daytime. Electric Avenue. Rock it